where the importance of using it 3 times.
Yeah, so anytime you see the repetitiveness, it's an emphatic statement.
So
it's like saying truly, 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 or anything like that. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Needless to say, I don't think it was bad English.
Well, I don't think it's in Greek. It probably sounds perfectly right, but when you try to translate it and you're trying to put in all the words with the endings and the adverbs and adjectives and this, that, and the other, it's a little bit more difficult.
So, yes. Is the answer.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so Jesus and the Father are one, according to John chapter 10 and verse 30. The two are inseparable. And when we think about the suffering Christ, do we think about his voluntary self-surrender on the cross to die for you and me, for the world, for a people that are sinners in front of God? Or do you think about the willingness of God to allow his Son to come and be a sacrifice for those same people?
Yes.
Yes. I love those. Those are great. Okay. Let's see here. Where am I at? All right, so we are on question number 3. How much longer did Jesus say he would be with his disciples? Short time, yet a little while. Doesn't give us an actual, we know now because we can count the hours from where we're at. But he just says, in a short time, in a little while, I am with you, and then you will seek me, and then I will be gone.
Seek him where? If I bury you, where am I going to seek you? How are they seeking him?
Well, that's a good question. Are they seeking him physically or spiritually?
It never occurred to me until I literally just said it.
Any thoughts?
Twofold.
This means when I'm gone.
Okay.
Twofold. One, in their mind, if he was going to be setting up a physical kingdom, then they would continue to be looking for him even after he was taken by the Romans, probably right up to the point of his death, because their expectation level is, well, he's going to come down off the cross and set up a physical kingdom. So in one sense, that's seeking him. In another sense, he's promised them that when the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, comes, that would give to the apostles all the teaching that Christ had given, and in that regard, they are also seeking after him.
Okay. I tend to take the first aspect here because he's talking about them being little children, spiritually immature. But you guys are great. I don't even have to teach tonight. I'll just ask the questions and you just tell me the answers. Luke 24:21, if somebody can turn over there. Luke 24:21. This is what Gil was talking about.
But we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the 3rd day since these things were done.
Okay. Going back to his point. We thought he was going to redeem Israel. And when we mean redeem Israel, we mean reestablish, bring back to its greatness this nation of people. Did he redeem Israel when he died on the cross? Absolutely. And really, the truth of it is, Israel is the children of God, so it would be those that are children of God. So they talk about it even in that sense, that we thought he was going to do this. And so you can only imagine, you've been with somebody for 3 years, your excitement's there, you know he's the Messiah, you absolutely believe that with all your heart, soul, and mind. He's been teaching you, you have seen wonderful miracles and signs by his hands. Some of the things he says you don't quite understand, but he's with you. And now he's telling you, I'm not going to be here anymore. But you're going to seek me. You're going to look for me. And part of that, I think, is that they're going to have to understand why he's doing what he's doing. And they don't get that answer right away. It comes later. But the real reason he is saying this is a comparison between what he said to the Jews in 8:21 and what he is saying to the disciples, because he uses the same words. You cannot come with me But what is the difference in the two statements that he makes? The first one, he said, you will die in your sins, and you cannot come where I go. The second one is, you will seek me, but you cannot come where I am going.
Prefaced by a warm phrase.
Prefaced by a warm phrase. So the difference is the way someone comes to know Christ. Over here, you have no desire to know him. You're going to die in your sins, and you're not going to be able to come where I'm at. Over here, you are seeking me. You're going to die at some point, and you're not able to come where I'm coming at right now. But this is where the Greek gets interesting, because Jesus employs a word here that is now, as in not yet. Not in the sense of never. It's a not yet, but you will, at some point in time, you will be able to come where I'm at. Gil.
There is the primary difference between the two. There are people in this world seeking Christ and going about it the completely wrong way. They're doing it on their own agendas, their own opinions. They're ignoring what God has to say. They're going to seek and never find because they can't go where he's at. The apostles, the disciples on the other hand, will eventually seek and find. There's the difference.
There's the difference. Okay, any other thoughts about... Okay, so Jesus is going to go to the Father eventually. They cannot come now, but they will be able to come afterward once the work is done. But they have to die first in order for that relationship to come to fruition. And this is really the great difference between those that are his true disciples and those that are his enemies. The enemies are going to die in their sins. Those that seek God in faith and obedience are going to find Christ and God. And let me say this a little bit differently. Through Christ, we'll get to come to God. But we have to seek Jesus' words, his tenets, his teachings. But Jesus is building them up here. So we're taking verse by verse. If you don't take it verse by verse and you read it as sort of a story, you have a situation that just happened. Judas' story, right? I'm not going to go back over it. And then Jesus takes an opportunity to say, what you just saw is the glorification of the Son of Man, and the Father being glorified, and the Father glorifying the Son. And then he says, while I am with you, I'm only going to be with you a little bit longer, but you're going to seek me, but you can't come to where I'm going. And then he's going to say the next thing. So let's look at verse 34. A new precept I give you, that you keep on loving one another just as I have loved you, that you also keep on loving one another. Now, take again that in context. What happened with Judas? Is Judas showing love for Christ? So he's taking this example that just happened over here, and he's using that to make a point on this side over here. That if you truly love me, what? Keep my commandments, seek me, so on and so forth. Somebody had Aaron, did you have a point? I thought somebody raised their hand. Was it you? Okay, go.
As we look at this, when Christ was arrested, the disciples were scattered because they were afraid. Had they not had a great love for him and or for each other, they never would have become the apostles that got sent out. And that's what he says in verse 35. You're my disciples when you take my teaching, my word, my gospel, and you give it to others. That shows love, not only your love for me, your love for each other and support for each other, but also your love for all mankind.
Okay, jumping ahead a little bit, but but you're exactly right. Eric.
So one of the things that we know is the clock's been started, so to speak, in this period of perhaps the Passion Week, or this idea that a lot's going to happen here really fast. And so oftentimes, we see that even in our society today, that when things rush us head on, we may be prepared, but we forget the basics of what we should be doing, even though all this confusion is going on. And I believe Jesus is telling them, there's going to be a lot of things happening, and even the betrayal, and even the separation, and all the trials and the scattering. What's the one thing you've got to keep? What is it? You've got to keep the main thing, and the main thing is you've got to love.
Okay, and you're gonna. That's exactly where I want to go with this, because there's a word that's used here, and it's the word new. A new precept I give you. Now, he had already shown them love through the washing of the feet, and he'd already had this discussion with them. And then he says, well, I'm going to give you a new precept. This new precept is that you are to keep on loving one another, just as I have loved you, that you are also to keep on loving one another. And it's interesting because the word new here isn't what we would say is new, like as in out of the blue, this is something you've never heard before. So I'm going to walk through this with you just a little bit. That word in the Greek is used in 3 different ways. The first way it's used is a legal commandment or order, and we see this with the Sanhedrin in chapter 11 and verse 57. I'm not going to go over there, but I'm just going to tell you that this is the process that we see here. So that word is used as a legal commandment or an order issued by the Sanhedrin in chapter 11 and verse 57. 4 other times in John, it's used with respect to the charge or instruction given to Jesus by the Father. In John 10:18, in John 12:49 and 50, and John 14 and 31. The other times that we see it, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, is with respect to the precept given by Jesus to his disciples. 13:34, which we're on now, 14:15 and 21, 15:10 and 12. So it has a very similar meaning each time it is being used. And so let's talk about what each of these would be. If you have a legal commandment that comes from man, it may come with emotion, it may come with a love for you, it may come for a disdain for you, it may come for just an agnostic view of who you are. It doesn't have that attached to it. It's just a command. And that's what we see really with the Sanhedrin, because obviously they shrouded themselves in love for mankind, but they had little love for man. And so when it's used in that way, it's an outward, official, codified law. You know, we can say most of our laws, if not all of our laws, are that way. And I want you to think about it from that perspective. So a secular law, we'll just call it that. When we see the charge or the instruction given by the Father to the Son, you see that the sender is and has a love that he is giving to the sent. In other words, it is in complete harmony with each other. It's a relationship that occurs in such a way that what God is sharing or God is telling Christ to do, it is something that Christ takes hold of and does because he's in exact agreement with the Father, not only in what is being done or said, but also in the love that is shared between the two of them. Much different than the commandment type, the secular type. A precept, as it is defined here, is a little different. This is also love from the sender to the sent, but the precept is clouded in or shrouded in an example of what is to be expected. So it's telling somebody to do something and showing them that you yourself do that for them also. And so that's the way this particular style of the word is being used. And this is what I wrote. The precept is a rule by Jesus and illustrated by his own example for the regulation of conduct and inner attitude of the disciples towards Christ, towards one another, and towards the world. So it's not just a command where he says, I want you to go do this, and then says, okay. It's a command, but it's also shrouded in the fact that Jesus did these things. He has been this way. This is how his life has been lived, even through his death, even through all the things that he does after his death. Eric.
So that would even demonstrate itself in John 3:16, where God so loved. That action of doing it,
Correct.
Jesus could repeat it, the apostles could repeat it.
Correct.
That type of love.
Correct. And the reason I said the secular thing, I want you to think about elderships. Elderships have a responsibility to take hold of commandments that God has given, and they have to exact those commandments to the congregation. And they do that because of a love that they have for us and a love that they have for God. They're not doing it just because it's a commandment. They're doing it because there's a relationship that's taking place there. But it's also done out of their own obedience to God and their own example that they share with the people that they love. That's a precept. And that's what this is talking about here.
So it's like the shepherds following the great shepherd.
Yes. Exactly. And the idea of new here isn't new in the sense that it's something you've never heard before, because I'm going to show you that they know this. It's the difference here is I'm not telling you what to do. I have showed you what to do. I have given you an example. And that newness here is that not only are you supposed to go and know this, but you have to live this. You have to do this, and I've given you an example of that. There's two words in the Greek for new. This is the other, the other new. And this is what it means. It's sort of a lesson in this precept of saying, I've done this, and so now I want you to go forward and do this. And Jesus has never said it like this before, but he says it after he's already shown this love, and he will continue to show this love.
Well, going back to that John 3:16, it's not just the example, it's the perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
No ambiguity, no hypocrisy in it. It is perfect love demonstrated. So if you ever had to see the original and had to go back to the original, that's what it would look like.
Exactly. And we have a scripture that actually gives us the two, not the secular one, but the two together. And that's John 15:10, if somebody wants to turn over there real quick. John chapter 15 and verse 10.
If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love.
Okay. There's the two statements of love and the precept that we see.
James?
Yes, sir.
So I would have never gotten that out of the word new, as used in English. And I know we're supposed to study, and I got that part. But do other translations translate it different? I mean, I use New American Standard Updated. Do other translations use a different phrasing that would better get that idea across? Because that's a face plant for me.
It is. And the word is kaina, Kaine, and not nea, which is Nea. I went through both of those with a fine-tooth comb. Nea means more of like a reissuing of a command, like you've heard this before, but I'm telling you again. Kaina was more of what I just said, where it's this idea of not only is this precept something that you may not have heard or understood, but I'm also encapsulating it with this idea of example as well.
Which is the ESV or one of the other translations use a better...
I didn't see it. Charles, do you have the Young's Literal up on your phone?
I just checked it. Young says
New Commandment also. Yeah, I mean, it's very clearly new in Greek, but for us, and this is what's hard, is, our language is somewhat limited, and so sometimes we get a perspective in our minds of what it is when they're like, no, it really means these things over here. Aaron.
I like the word new in there just because of that reason, because it makes me feel face planted. Wait. And then, yeah, because ultimately, in my mind, it was like some of the commandments he made before. It's like, no, really. This is a new thing. So what's new about this commandment that is given? If we want to make it a literal translation, what's new about what Jesus is talking about? Is it new to Jesus? No. It's new to the apostles? Yeah, I think so. But because it's this level of love that he's going to talk about.
Well, I would say if you want to go that route,
Sure.
take the part just as I have loved you. That's what's different, because we're going to go back and look in a minute. That's not the way it's said in the Old Testament.
It's kind of like, upgraded version of love.
Well, they could have never known love without Christ.
That right.
It would have been impossible. That's why
Right.
I knew, I think I get that connection.
Yeah, and I think that that's what's sort of hard. Yeah, Karen.
And it's new, it's not typical.
Right. It's new. Right.
It's reproducible, because he's already shown them how.
Exactly.
He's not giving them a recipe and saying, here, go make this. He's saying, here, I've shown you what to do, here's what I expect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good point. Good point.
So the newness can be determined, the meaning of it, by the third phrase, even as I have loved you.
Even as I have loved you.
What
Yeah.
basically interprets the previous phrase.
Correct. Yeah, because if we go over to Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18, I'm short on time, so I'll just read it here. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So a difference here is we see this, the love that Jesus has for them, and then he says, go and do this for other people. The demonstration of the reciprocation and the ability to duplicate that love for others.
It's a commandment of love, I mean, as you just pointed out a little bit, at least back in Leviticus, if not before. So the new part is found in the third phrase.
Right,
If I'm
right.
understanding.
That's what I think. If you want to take it from that perspective, I think that that's where it's at, is that the idea of this, I've shown you what it means to be obedient to the Father. I've shown you what it means to love you and to do this for you. I need you to do the same thing.
I'll forgive the Greeks for using words.
So I know you're short on time. but
Yeah.
You brought up something that I think is important. The Jews could have only learned of love through the Ten Commandments because they were the drafting of how one should love his God, love his neighbor, and love his society. Those would have been the commandments that everything hinged upon this concept of love. Stand to be wrong, but as I look at those Ten Commandments, I see them drafted in those three kind of ordinances towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's why I think this is a new type of love, because like I said, they could not have experienced it without Christ being there.
And it's not like they didn't have God showing and establishing his love in front of them. He did all the time, but they never saw it that way.
I want to come back and kind of reemphasize something that you mentioned earlier on 1 John. Loving God is synonymous with keeping his commandments. That's how we show love for God. We keep his commandments. What Jesus is telling the disciples here is, you've been with me for 3 years. I have been trying to teach you how to go and teach others to love God by keeping his commandments. The world can't know love if you, as my apostles, don't go and show it to them by keeping his.
Correct. And that's the point he makes in verse 35, right? By this, everybody will recognize that you are my disciples if you keep on having love for one another.
So in terms of the new commandment, up to this point, except for the limited commission, Jesus hasn't sent his disciples out on the Great Commission.
That's correct.
This is going to be their opportunity to go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature.
Right.
That's a new commandment.
Right. That's a good point. Eric.
Well, if I have the last word, it'll be a good one. What I think is fascinating about it is that how do we hear that example in today's society? People go, and you call yourself a Christian? You can see just how it has gone. If we're to act as Christ would, they would say, there's a Christian. But when we claim to be a Christian and don't act like a Christian, we get, and you call yourself a Christian?
Exactly.
You can see the flip side of that almost immediately.
And the interesting thing is they know enough about Christianity to know.
That's right.
So, Charles.
Jesus has been preparing it for 3 years to get to this point, which he's about ready to give the ultimate love,
Right.
giving himself completely. And I think when they realize that point, they think back to this point and say, love even as I have loved you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is hard because we're going to talk about next week all the things that go on here, and but this all started with Judas. Remember, this is that point. So let me share this poem with you real quick. I found this, and I think this is just apropos to what we're talking about, and it sort of touched my heart. How can you lead to Christ your boy unless Christ's method you employ? There's just one thing that you can do. It's let that boy see Christ in you. Have you a husband fond and true, a wife who's blind to all but you? If each would win the other one, that life must speak of God's dear Son. There is but one successful plan by which to win a fellow man. Have you a neighbor, old or new? Just let that man see Christ in you. The church that hopes to win the lost must pay the one unchanging cost. She must compel the world to see in her the Christ of Calvary. I'll leave that with you. Thank you. Appreciate the study tonight.